Siendo las 5:03.
Good afternoon, it's 5:03 or 3:03. Good afternoon, everyone. Would like to welcome you all to this academic forum on the new constitution for Chile. This webinar will be in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation into English. And we would like to ask to speak in a good pace. And the constitution process in Chile is being followed around the world. And there are many initiatives that we have developed so as to generate a more productive debate. And this is what we are dealing with right now. It's a process, and we are building a process that is more inclusive, participative, and the repercussions of the process will go beyond the borders. My name is Marcela Renteria. I am the executive director of the Harvard in Chile, at the part of the Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies in the Harvard University, Dr. Class. And for me, it's a great honor to be part of this forum for this new constitution in Chile. And on behalf of Dr. Glass, the regional office in Chile, and the Andes and Cono Sur program managed by Jimena Godina and Steve Levitsky, Professor David Rockefeller, the Latin American Studies, governance professor in Harvard University. I'd like to welcome you all to this forum. Throughout the constitutional change, Dr. Class will present a platform for an open debate to discuss different issues and mainstreaming all the issues that Chileans will be facing by rethinking and rewriting their constitution. This goes beyond Chile, and it wants to include the rest of Latin America as well as the United States. And with that, we will be bringing together scholars, people from the political arena, and civil society. I would like to tell you that to debate these issues, we have chosen a group of scholars, 7, that are part of this committee, consulting committee, and will be here with us in this initiative with a role, an active role in collaboration with these institutions. You see them here. I will appoint them or name them, and they will say hello. The Dr. Class, Harvard University, we have Cristian Rodriguez. He is the new Dr. Class Associate and the Levitsky Visiting Scholar 2021. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marcela. And it is a great pleasure to be part of this initiative, be part of this dialogue throughout this whole road on writing the new constitution. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the following months and years while this endeavor takes place. Thank you, and from the Institute of Public Affairs in the University of Chile, we have Claudia Heiss, Public Affairs and member of the Constitution process, and she also leads the program on the University of Chile in political science, yes. The pre-graduate Steve Levitsky was with us, and he was talking to our students. It's a great honor to participate in this initiative, and thank you very much for Dr. Class. Veronica Figueroa, she's also a teacher on Public Affairs Institute, and also Dr. Class Levitsky Scholar 2019 and 2020. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here as a Mapuche. We're trying to visualize and bring forward this discussion. Thank you very much for the invitation. And we have the Catholic University, the Institute of Political Sciences with Sol Serrano. She is our 2018 National History Award and Dr. Klaas Luksic Visiting Scholar 2008-2009. Thank you. I would like to thank once again for Dr. Klaas, what Dr. Klaas has brought. And thank you, Harvard, for being here with us. And we hope we will make out of this experience an experience that would be useful for the whole continent. I'm very grateful for the hospitality. We have Professor Sebastián Soto from the public right, the Faculty of Right of Law in the Catholic University. And also Dr. Klaas, visiting scholar 2013 and 14.
Muchas gracias, Marcela. Muchas
Thank
gracias
you,
también a Steve y a
Marcela,
todo el equipo de Dr. Klaas por esta
Steve, and
invitación,
the whole
por la
team of Dr.
oportunidad que
Klaas
nos dan
for the
de poder
invitation
abrir una mesa, un diálogo
and
académico
for
sobre
the
estos temas tan
possibility of
relevantes
opening
para
up
los próximos años en
dialogue,
Chile.
academic dialogue. Juan Pablo Luna, Governance School at the Institute of Political Sciences in the Catholic University. He's also a moderator today. And thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank and great appreciation for Dr. Klaas and Harvard for the initiative that we're all waiting to be part of, and we hope we can contribute for the country and to think about the region that has become a bit complicated. The other institutions that are supporting us is the Millennium Institute and the Governance School of the Catholic University, as well as a group of students of Harvard that is working with us, is collaborating, will become more active, and the role is to bring in the students from the Harvard University. It's the Chilean caucus, is from the Harvard School, and the Latin American caucus that is also going to be part of the initiative. It's another organization from Harvard. The initiative has the sponsorship and the support of the Luksic scholars. We are very thankful for that support. Without further ado, I would like to tell you what the webinar will be about. And this event will be in Spanish. We have interpretation into English. This webinar will be recorded and it will be in our YouTube channel. Everyone will receive the link of the invite, and in the chat you will see social networks for future events. This chat will be enabled for the audience, but Q&A buttons will be enabled, and you can start asking questions as soon as you consider it convenient. We'd like to thank you again for being part of this process, the process that we will be living with Chile, and that would be of great support and great use for the rest of the Americas. Would like to thank the whole team, and especially our director that will be leading this initiative. So for me, it's a great pleasure to introduce Juan Pablo Luna. He will tell us about his vision on the importance of this initiative. Juan Pablo is a professor on the School of Governance and the Institute of Political Science in the Catholic University and the Millennium Institute. And he is the author of, instead of Optimism, the political representation in current Chile, a doctor in political science in North Carolina University and the United States, Columbia visiting professor, Brown 2016, also Luksic visiting scholar 2012-13, and Princeton 2008, currently a columnist in Chile, And after this lengthy introduction, we're ready to start. And please be active, send us all the questions you might have. And hopefully we can answer them all. Thank you. Thank you, Marcela. And thank you for the invitation. As we said before, the initiative is lengthy. It's and hopefully we can contribute in the public debate in the next month or years. And this starts with the interest of Dr. Class. We have been the fellows of Dr. Class in Chile, as well as the institutions we're affiliated with in the country and that are also supporting the initiative. So what we are looking for is to articulate debates that will touch on relevant issues for the future of the country. And in this sense, what we're trying to do is through the academic dialogue, with Chile, with the region and the world, what we are looking for is to think in line with the situation, with a cold head, and think deep on fundamental issues for the future of the country, as well as for the future of Latin America. Think about democracy, think about the development of the countries. So in this sense, we started with the base that the constituent debate that is going to start happening next year, and that is open right now, will involve issues regarding the strength of the state, of the administration of the state as a whole, and the development model, and also beyond the constitutional agreement. And in that sense, we are open. We're open to receive suggestions from your side, from the audience, as Marcela was saying, we want you to be part of the forum. We want you to participate, to actively participate in a proactive way. So in this sense, even though we have a number of events planned from now until April next year, we're open for proposals. We're open to consider proposals, issues for any issue, anything you might consider as a fundamental issue that needs to be discussed in this situation, the current situation of the country. We will have in the chat a link to a questionnaire. This is a brief questionnaire. It could be answered in a minute or less. And would like to ask you to participate, to make suggestions, to tell us about the issues you're interested in, so we can deal with those issues in our future conferences. We have a primary list. And once again, we are fully open for the suggestions you might send us. Some of the things that could be touched on are the rights in the future legislation, the future constitution, how to build up a political community after the rupture or the crisis that we are undergoing right now, and that is starting in the country in this year, and the possible role of institutions, democratic institutions, and direct democracy, participative democracy, and overcoming this crisis, this legitimacy crisis, how to improve democratic representation, thinking about minorities, women, indigenous people, as well as other groups that are underrepresented. And what are the promises as well as limitations that we might find in such a context, a green constitution? So this is basically what we have on the table. And we are striving for gathering opinions to capture your preferences. And we have 3 panel members. we will have a presentation, 35 minutes, Steve Levitsky, and we will then have a comment, 10-minute comment on from Claudia Heiss and Sebastián Soto. Steve Levitsky is director of the Davis Rockefeller Center, doctoral class in Harvard University, and professor of Latin American Studies and Governance in the same university. He received a doctorate in California, Berkeley. And his research is on authoritarianism, political parties, institutions, and the features of the informal institutions. And it has become famous with Daniel Ziblatt of the bestseller, How Democracies Die, that has been published in 2018 by Crown and has been translated to 22 languages. Political scientists were already famous and in political science, and probably one of the top 3 leaders on compared politics worldwide. Steve publishes opinion columns and multiple articles, books on different areas in the New York Times, in Foreign Affairs, in Cage, in the Republic, in La República in Peru, and Folia in Sao Paulo. Claudia Heiss, a professor of the Institute of Public Affairs in INAP in the University of Chile, author of another bestseller, Why Do We Need a New Constitution? And that is being read by many Chileans nowadays, and those that have not read it, you're all invited to do so, to get into this discussion of the Constitution process, member of the current process, doctorate on social research in the United States and a master's in political science in the Columbia University. Claudia is a journalist of the University of Chile, and she was obtained a scholarship and a Fulbright scholarship. And she was the chairman of the Political Science Association in Chile.
Sebastián Soto is constitutional law professor in Universidad Católica, the director of public law in Facultad Derecho, in the law. He was Luxich visiting scholars in doctoral class in 2013 and 14, PhD in law by Universidad de Chile, with LLM in Columbia University, and almost ready to publish a book which we could recommend its reading. The book is almost coming to be sold, which is so-called The Hour of the Reconstitution, the guide for this, and it will be published, no doubt, by editions of Universidad Católica. Not much to say, Steve. The time for you is coming. It's 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will listen to the comments and opinion of Claudia and Sebastian. Thank you, Juan Pablo, and thank you, panel members, Claudia and Sebastian, and the rest of the consulting committee, or this great contribution that you have given us, and also valued. We have forgotten some person. Claudio Fuentes, I want to introduce to you as member of the committee, professor of political science, and collaborated for the Constitutional Lab in Universidad Diego Portales. Among other things, Claudia has been also Luxich visiting scholars for almost 10 years. Claudia, are you there? Can you tell us a little thing? Maybe not. I want to thank you, Marcela Renteria, and the whole team of Dr. Class. Without this initiative and the work and commitment of Marcela, this forum would have not been possible. So thank you very much, Marcela Renteria. I would like to talk about the democracy crisis in the United States and Chile. And please, I apologize because of the quality of my Spanish. We have two translators, one translator for Spanish of myself into real Spanish and the other from that Spanish into English. So it's a sort of complication. Many ways to die. It's what we have. Polarization is killing democracy, the distance and the hate between the Republicans and the Democrats have gone to dangerous levels. In the 60s, in 1960, there was a survey. Less than 5% of Republicans say that they would bother if their children would buy another from the other party. Now it is 50%. So it's almost 50% of members of both parties saying that the other party, they fear it. And 60% of Democrats in the United States say that the other party represents danger for the country. In the United States, we haven't seen this hatred in parties since 19th century. Polarization is not the typical rightist leftist. It is racial discrimination and against it. The Republicans represent the white majority and Christian, and the Democrats represent the rest of the country, whites, secular, cosmopolitan, ethnic minorities, immigrants. That division is very important because the Christian white is not just a group. They founded the country. They dominated the country for 2 centuries. And half a century when I was a child, the Christian white represented more than 90% of the constituents, occupying the best jobs and the political hierarchies, social, economical. There used to be the president, the governor, the senators, the judge, the mayor, entrepreneurs, and businessmen, the TV people, and the main face of the other party. But these days, that is ending. The Christian white are losing their majority. In 1992, the Christian white were 73% of the constituents, and 2012 it was 57% of them. And 2024, the next election for president, it is very probable that they will be less than 50% of the electorate. And apart from losing their majority, the Christian white are losing little by little the dominant status in that society. Why is that important? When you lose majority, and especially to lose the dominant status in a society, is something that is profoundly threatening. Many Republicans today feel that the country that they have when they were children is being robbed, and the Christian America they used to know is in ways of extension. And this, for many, means the existence threat. Radicalization of Christian white is the base of the Republican Party and the main source of the polarization in the United States. But the problem, as Chileans know, is that polarization kills. When politics are so polarized, the triumph of our rivals looks unacceptable and catastrophic. So we justify extraordinary measures in order to avoid them winning, like violence, electoral fraud, coup d'etat, something that has not happened, the coup d'etat in the United States, but polarization, mine and erosion, two key standards that are basic in the democracies. One, what we call mutual tolerance, which is recognizing and how legitimate we think others are. Where we have mutual tolerance, we can publicly recognize and in private that our rivals are patriots, that they love their country as we love the country, and that they have the right to be politicians, to compete, and if they won, the legitimate right to govern. But in other words, we don't treat rivals as enemies. We don't treat our rivals as an existential threat. When we don't see them as legitimate and when we start looking at them as existential threats, then we start abandoning the second standard or rule that is key for democracy, that we call in English forbearance. That will be like containment, which is the right or not exercising the right to a legal right. Any law under any constitution could be abused. The letter of that law could be used to violate the spirit, vacancy on the impeachment because of political reasons, excluding candidates because of minor democratic failure, or in jailing other opposition because of tax evasion. Mark Titchener, Harvard constitutional man, created a term for this sort of behavior, using that letter of the law to violate the spirit. Constitutional horrible. I don't know, but this is how tough constitutional it is. Any case that collapses in the world, you will see this abundance in Spain and Germany, Argentina with Peron, Chile, Uruguay in the 70s, Hungary, Poland, Venezuela, Turkey in the 21st century. So hardness comes from polarization. When we see our rivals as enemy, as existential threat, then containment comes out of the window as temptation calls for using any element that is available to beat the others. Republican Party in the United States fell in that mentality. We've seen it when they took some position in the Supreme Court in 2016. We have seen it in the effort to reduce the voting of minorities. We've seen them in their decision on uh, shutting up when Trump was causing abuses, and when they went with Trump in their attempt to cause the annulment of the elections. So radicalization of the Republican Party is bringing us to the limit of an institutional world where politicians use institutions as party weapons, political weapons, looking for destruction of the rival, whatever the cost is. The Chilean have seen this movie. They lived that half a century ago. The Chilean politicians learned from the tragedies of the 70s, and they know well what's the cost of polarization and how founders of current democracies, the democratic setting that was looking for a new way of making politics, and they built consensus-based democracy. So the idea was to bridge that gap, political gap, through the agreement negotiation between the parties, between the businessmen, and the pacts that protected the basic interests of the main actors were seen as necessary to avoid the all or nothing of the 70s, containing electoral competencies or competition, and with the end of making sure that no force is threatened. Now, this new way of doing politics was inaugurated in the 1989. There was from elites, and the agreements were between parties and in closed doors, and the citizens' participation was not receiving that much of an attention in the 90s. And public consultation tried actively to avoid popular mobilization, not to fear the right, and they bet on bringing them out of politics. One of the main lessons that the uh, political scientists took from the 70s is that polarization kills. I'm the best analyst of transition of a democracy in a region, 30 years on. Stanford also, Levitsky, honest spirit, agreed on this. To consolidate democracy, we had to do all possible to avoid polarization, not to frighten the right. And concertación leaders learn the lessons better than anyone, negotiating pacts, creating coalitions, governing by consensus, avoiding the radical discourse and popular mobilization. So they built a democracy that was not polarized. They were successful. There was a democracy that consolidated, the economy grew in Chile, and the country became the original model, applauded by the organizations and international experts. But this new way did not end right. Generation of concertación, the best students of the 80s and 90s, building a democracy based on negotiations and consensus, left a democracy in crisis. What happened then? As you know, a democracy with pacts eventually went into a deep legitimacy crisis, and the Chilean started to move away from politics, stop participating in the parties and in politics. They stopped trusting the democratic institutions. The Chilean politicians followed step by step, but they went away from society, and they didn't want to be close to the people, and they don't see the pacted democracy for the political scientists. Negotiations and agreement are not just necessary but positive, and are the base of democratic consolidation. They're the source agreement. And people would not see that. When they see pact, they see collusion, they see a cartel of politicians that want to get into the power. They see exclusion, the political elite that is not responding to society demands. And people are not wrong. The negotiation of agreement is from the elite, and they're closed door negotiations, and many of the times they negotiate things that have not much to do with the demands of the people. So this pacted democracy is a double-sided sword, which be key for democracy as it was in Chile, but in the mean term could be costly in legitimacy. Okay, that said, I think it's quite confusing saying that polarization is killing democracy in the United States, just as it did in Chile in the 1970s. But then the main remedies to combat polarization are looking for consensus, agreement negotiations, and to arrive to democracy. This is the first lesson of 3 that I would like to take out of my comparison brief between Chile and the States.
There are many ways to die, and the North American democracy suffers too much corruption and too much consensus, and there is no one cause of democratic collapse. Point 1. And in the second conclusion is that consolidation, democratic consolidation doesn't exist. Democracy is never 100% safe, and it's never 100% stable. No institutional design is permanent. So a constitution that strengthens democracy in a time in history might reduce it or might damage it. So there is no institutional model that works everywhere and every time. There is no best practice, original best practice that would last forever. Efficacy or efficiency of the institutions will vary depending on the context. Now, Americans don't trust that. We believe that we reached a perfection in the institution in 1778, and we treat our constitution as if it's the 10 Commandments. because we believe that the institutions designed are unique and are unbeatable, and the best practice of 18th century still is the best practice in 21st century. This is absolutely absurd and it's ridiculous based on ignorance and a lack of knowledge. Institutions need to adapt in time. Those that do not adapt, they will go into a crisis. Think again about the United States. Today, the constitutional system, the American constitutional system, has two effects that could be very tough. It could be fatal. They were not defects when the system was created 230 years ago. They were defects that throughout time they were coming out due to a social context. First, our system, our systems, constitutional systems to counterbalance the constitutional area, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the Senate, very strong. This system was not designed for a system of polarized parties. Founders never thought of polarized parties. They never thought of political parties. They basically thought of an elite of individuals that were able to negotiate and reach consensus. So the system worked for 2 centuries while the main parties were heterogeneous, fragmented, and pragmatic, not ideological, not disciplined, heterogeneous parties, pragmatic parties. The fraction of these parties, they would reach agreements, consensus, and that's how it worked for 200 years. In the last 30 years, the American parties, they became more coherent, more disciplined, and more polarized. And polarization makes it impossible to negotiate agreements and reach consensus among parties. In this context, the American democracy has become dysfunctional. And we see this in politicization of the Supreme Court. We see it in the process of the impeachment against Trump, when the Republicans simply they said they were not taken, they waived the responsibility of investigating because it was more important for them to overcome the Democrats. So we see it in our lack of capacity of responding to pandemic, and we see it with the crisis that we just suffered. Our famous system, commitment system is broken, and we are in a very high level of consequences. The North American system has not become capable or has not been capable in responding to the major issues of society. And this is mining the trust of the people. An average American, they say they're not satisfied with democracy. And this number has increased in less than 25% and now over 55%. And also the Latin Americans, when they lose trust of the democratic system that could solve the problems, society becomes more vulnerable to the outsiders that promise to solve problems otherwise. Constitution is the same, has not changed, but what has changed is the socio-political context, polarized parties, disciplined parties, and that made it dysfunctional. Another defect, constitutional defect, lately we have witnessed the problem of the government and the minorities. Our system favors territories that are not highly populated. It favors states, the electorate system favors the least populated states, and as the Senate is the one that approves the nomination for the Supreme Court, it also favors territories that are less populated. So this bias has always existed in the United States, but it never had a major effect because both parties had these different groups, but they were more even. Now we have a greater cleavage, and the Democrats are the parties of the cities. Republicans is the party of the rural sector. That means, and this is not to blame the Republicans, but Republicans have an advantage, a systematic advantage in the Electoral College, at the Senate, and that means that a government of minority might rule. So North Americans have lost the popular vote for the presidential careers in 7 out of the last 8, but they have governed 12. They lost 7 of 8 times, but they have governed 12. A majority, an electoral majority, was not enough for Biden to win in 2020. So he needed to win only for 4 points. If it was for 3 or 5 points, he wouldn't have won in the Electoral College. So the Senate is worse. Democrats, they need to win 54% of the popular vote to maintain a majority. And the government and minorities have impacted on the Supreme Court. In 2017, Neil Gorsuch became the first judge in the Supreme Court in the history of the Republic, being nominated by a president that lost a popular vote and then be approved by senators that represented a majority of the country. Brett Kavanaugh in 2018 became the second judge in the history of the Supreme Court to be nominated president that lost in the popular vote and then be approved by senators that represented a majority of the country. In October this year, Amy Coiter became the third judge of the Supreme Court, being nominated by a president that lost a popular vote and then be approved by the senators that approved it, a minority of the country. So the conservative majority ruling the Supreme Court today represents a minority of the population. So we have fallen into a system of government ruled by a minority. This is not undemocratic, but it will lead to a crisis, a very strong crisis. The new generation, young people will not accept that, will not tolerate this. Once again, Constitution has not changed, but the social-political context has changed. And my point is that democracy is a constant struggle. And the defenders of democracy, they need to be aware. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of the American democracy, said that Constitution needed to be changed every 19 years. Well, 19, it's a bit exaggerated, but Jefferson was right. Institutions, even the best institutions, do not last forever. And when the world changes, society changes, democratic institutions need to adapt. The third and last conclusion that I would like to take from this, in a comparison of the United States and Chile, is that inequality is important. One thing the United States and the US have in common in the last decade is negligence, is full negligence on Social Security. At the end of the 80s, the main central left parties in Chile and in the United States, they bet strongly on the consensus. They bet on globalization, free trade, fiscal and monetary policies, and they also accepted a reduction of regulation, the reduction of union protection, the reduction of taxes to the rich as necessary things to foster investment. This convergence, more or less orthodox, had serious consequences. Because in the case in the United States, increased social inequality and stopped ascent, the social ascent. And the elite, the North American elite, as well as the Chilean elite, thought that inequality was not going to be a major problem for democracy. If they had civil rights if they had a rule of law that worked, if the economy was growing, and if economic growth and political policy reduced poverty, they thought that democracy could coexist with high levels of inequality, but they were wrong. Extreme inequality weakened democracy in both countries. Inequality is not an issue of income. It affects social status, it affects mobility, social mobility, and that generates obstacles to ascend. And economic inequality mines political representation, and in conditions of extreme economic inequality, well, politicians always respond more to those that have money, governments respond to those that have money, and all the institutions, democracy, justice, and police, they always favor the ones that have more money. So with time, a state that favors the rich will see public trust in democracy. So then people start questioning, does democracy exist at all? So inequality in time generates a sensation of unfairness, injustice, anger towards the elite. And these are favorable conditions for all these anti-system movement, populistic movement, and that has generated anger that was brought in by Trump, and in Chile was expressed on the streets. So I think the constitutional process in Chile represents an important opportunity. I am in totally disagreement with the analysts as Sebastián Edwards that see new constitution as a tragic road or moving away from the right path, or something that will take us to an Argentinian destination, quote unquote. So if 80% of the citizens that voted to come out of that constitution, well, something was wrong. New constitution is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to save democracy, and it is an opportunity to create a system that could be better, that could be more democratic. And there are reasons, and I do believe there are reasons for optimism. First, pluralism of the Chilean politics. And in spite of the crisis of traditional parties, there are still strong trends of left, central, and right wings in Chile. That means that no force will hegemonize or will capture or impose the process, on the constitutional process. A Chavistic assembly would be impossible. This will be more like the Colombian in 1981, fragmented, polarized. It's not easy. It will be difficult. It will be difficult to reach agreements and to see the new rules of engagement or the rules of the game, because we have many diverse sectors. However, the final product might be interesting. It could be positive. The second reason why I'm optimistic is because countries as Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile has an institutional base that is strong. It has a strong state, it has rule of law that is solid, it has institutions that work. Countries as Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, their institutions are weak. Their constitutions say a lot, but don't do much because law is not respected and because they change every 10 years. In Chile, rules change less and they're met. Institutions, they are enrooted, they last long, and the new rules of the game out of this constitutional process will not be ephemeris. They will not be superficial as in Ecuador. They will be solid and probably more durable. Of course, not all institutions will work well, but some will. Some of the new rules might improve the quality of representation, and supporting a more fair regime, democratic regime. And to finish, difficult times Difficult times are coming for Latin America democracy. And we cannot simply go back to the dark nights of the 70s. We have the opportunity, not only in Chile, in the whole region to save democracy. We need to take advantage of that opportunity. We need to adapt ourselves. Chileans are starting with this process. All Democrats of the region and even the United States need to follow this. There is a lot to learn. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I would like to offer the floor to Claudia for her comments. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Pablo. And thank you again for the Rockefeller Center for the Latin American Studies. And that received my colleague Veronica Figueroa Wanchu. She was there as a visiting scholar with you in Harvard. Steve was talking about polarization of the United States, and starting with that idea in your presentation, well, in Chile we do have a great debate if we have polarization or not in Chile. We do have a tense situation. However, there's no polarization as we lived in the countries at the end of the 60s. And this is a result of the referendum where it was 80-20, and polarization would be 80-20. We cannot say it's polarization per se. What we do have is a division among the elite and the citizens. We have a division between institutions, political institutions, and those that are not represented by those institutions that should represent them. And this is something that we have seen for such a long time. The report of the Human Development and Keynote and the distance of elites and citizens, and not only the elites, economic and political, but they consider them as elites, and the distance in surveys in the report on human development of the United Nations, they said if the state should have a central road in education, housing, and also in copper exploitation. The UNPD said that the citizens were 80% in favor of having the state managing that. And it's 30 or 20% the same answer for the elites. So it is a great distancing. There's a book called The Great Rupture, a growing breakup between people, institutions, and also institutions that should represent people. They also talked about demobilization of the coalition of central left parties as the return of democracy, of managing or leading the citizens to reach governance in the country. So this is the situation right now. Well, gave way to the Frente Amplio, which is extreme left, and also other sectors, and Edgardo Benninger, that followed the line of the beginning of transition. And then there was a sort of accommodation of the elites throughout all these years of democracy. So at the end, by mid-90s, when we start discussions of those that simply want to stay where they are and others that do some self-criticism, and we see a self-criticism. We see that they say, okay, we did not do social transformation. We did not challenge the neoliberal model. And this was the same government stopped. The coalition stopped. And this is something that they say that they did not do. That's why the change of President Lagos made to the constitution was not seen as a change, was not seen as a full change of the constitution. It changed some things, but it was not seen as the reform or a new constitution per se. because it was done following the same rules of the game marked from the beginning of the transition of the Constitution of the 80s, and that was transformed, but with the agreement of the ones that followed the dictatorship. Parties that were illegal, as the Party for Democracy, that was an instrumental party for conquering democracy, and they started in a very adverse situation during dictatorship, leaders that sacrificed themselves to rebuild democracy in this country. So these countries that had legitimacy, they lost their social base, they lost their legitimacy, because they were groups that simply stayed with the economic power. They simply accommodated in power, and they stopped the transformation, the political and economic transformation. So the pacts are, it produces governability and legitimacy. So it's democracy. Chilean democracy suffered from too much consensus. And it is a critical review on the consensus. And Chilean transition was an agreed transition, and this has been developed by Felipe Agüero. It was not an agreement between the government going out and in, or a change, or not as the agreement of Moncloa that gave the origin to democracy, to Spanish democracy. No, in Chile it wasn't like in Spain. So the reforms of 1989 that was done in dictatorship were the changes that made all the reforms, constitutional reforms during democracy, and how the reform of 2005 was done. The way of carrying this forward in democracy is linked to the Constitution, as well as all these tie-ins and all these rules that have held the all the institutions, grassroots participation, unions, etc. That's why Chile has one of the most drastic fall in participation in democratic processes. And that generated rejection to against the institution. Social movements starting 2005 with the students, and the judicialization of the situations of the health insurances. There are many claims against health insurances, the private systems, and there is a dichotomy, of traditional dichotomy on the electoral systems, on representativity, governance, that apply pretty well to this situation, and the distinction not only in the electoral area that was important in terms of the binomial approach, but the electoral system reflects it pretty well in Juan Pablo Luna, that reviewed the accountability, vertical and horizontal accountability of Guillermo Bone, that talks about how lack of accountability, vertical accountability, has deeply damaged Chilean democracy. Horizontal accountability is not enough. It needs horizontal accountability, needs both, and it will create erosion. So it is important to add a third dimension, and that third dimension is what Enrique Velosordi and Catalina Simonovic has talked about, the society accountability or societal accountability, because we need to foster that accountability, the vertical, but the horizontal too. This process, constitutional process, is important to have that dimension of inclusion, opening up participation and giving a voice to those groups that have been excluded. And that's why I think that the Constitutional Convention needs to be open negotiation. Well, we do have a lot of discussions here, and it is argumented with the John Esther works that have studied the way it was negotiated, and has made a parallel, the Constitutional Assembly in Paris, the one in Philadelphia, and that this was negotiated in closed doors that facilitates agreements and people might change opinion. But if that the people was at the doors of Paris difficulted the negotiation at the Constitutional Assembly in France. And these are, I understand rationality. I think this is something we can understand, but we need to see what happens in Chile. And what's urgent in Chile is a deep crisis in political representation, where political parties rejected independence to agree among themselves or agree with the parties, and they stopped the seats for the indigenous community. And that is a complementary agreement is something that has been in conversation since last November. So this is key for inclusion, for participation, and our constitutional process challenges us to set bridges between the political system, the citizens, and we are trying to channel institutionally with the Congress, with the political parties and a political reform. But without a doubt, the citizens were the ones that led this change. So are we going to be able to build bridges between the political system, the social, the society, those that are institutionalized, that are not institutionalized? Parties need to be aware that they need to open space for civil society, for grassroots organizations. They need to have, we have the process of Iceland, where the constitutional process was led by, against, by the political class. People would like to have the parties out of this discussion for the new constitution, and we saw it with the low votes on the mixed convention. So participation, and in Iceland they didn't have a new constitution. Citizens against the political system did not give any good results. So it's key to have the political parties with a role, and institutions should also have a role. We should see also the case in South Africa, where we had an intensive civic education process and participation that helped legitimize constitution. All this in Chile is not enough. It's not enough. We have gone through the process. We have seen it in the process of President Bachelet. So citizens have a higher expectation, higher than what happened in South Africa. People are aware. They want to participate. They want to express. We need to foster through the rules of the constitutional, what is accountability, and how accountability will work. Chile has lived this for decades already. It's not October 18 in 2019. This is not started. And we have times of direct democracy and the referendum of October, and at the end of the convention, as well as the election of the representative democracy. And I think that defense of the political representation needs to understand representation otherwise. It's not helping the political representation, the argument that defending democracy means defending the veto power that were inherited by dictatorship. So we need to support institutions that are in permanent thinking, generating channels, communicating, and this has to be permanent, and not only when we have elections. Democracy is the government of majority regarding the rights of the majority and not the minority. Third lesson on inequality is key. In Chile, politics has not reduced inequality due to the institutional standards that we have, and we need to strengthen political representation so the rules of the game will open up to reduce inequality through election. That means reducing exclusion of gender, and also the reduce the low participation and open up. So for the future, it will strengthen participation and representation of each and every one in democracy. Steve said that he was optimistic. The new constitution was an opportunity to save democracy. I do share that thought. I think we have elements of continuity, but also elements of rupture, because this is a process that has been fostered from below, from the citizens, and the opening level will be key of the success of that process.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Sebastián, you have 10 minutes. Hopefully we could use these 10 minutes so we could share some
Muchas gracias,
questions
Juan
and
Pablo.
answers at the end. Thank you very
Muchas
much,
gracias,
Juan
por
Pablo,
supuesto,
and thank you,
al
of
Rockefeller
course,
Center y a
David Rockefeller Center
Steve
for
por
Latin
la
American Studies, and Steve
estimulante
for this really
presentación que hizo. Para
stimulating
mí también
presentation
es
you've done.
un honor poder compartir con Claudia y con 3 cientistas
It's an
políticos,
honor
siendo
to
yo
share with
abogado.
Claudia and
Eso
with a political
me da cierta
scientist,
timidez,
being
pero creo
myself
que
a
la
lawyer. I
superaré
feel
a
shy
medida que avanzamos.
facing you guys, but I
Yo
hope
quiero
I could cope with that
detenerme en
while I
2
make
ideas
progress
a
talking. But I
propósito
would like
de
to stop in 2
volver a
ideas
reflexionar sobre
on
democracia. Yo creo
coming
que
back into reflections on
nunca está de más
democracy.
volver a hablar de
It's
democracia. A
never
veces
bad
creemos
to
que
talk
es el
about
sistema
democracy,
que nos tocó y por lo tanto que nos seguirá
and
tocando, pero como bien
it
dijo
will
Steve,
continue
nunca
to
esta se
happen.
consolida, sino
But
que
Steve said that
tenemos que
so well,
volver
it's never
siempre una y otra
consolidated.
vez
We
a
always
revisarlo.
have to go
Y me
back
parece
once
que
and again to
hablar de
check that.
democracia en Chile hoy
So
día
talking about democracy
nos
in Chile
obliga
today,
a
it seems to
vincularla con el
me,
proceso constituyente
is an
que
obligation to link
vivimos.
with the
Y
constitutional
sobre eso
process we're
entonces
living
quiero
in.
intentar
And
proponer
about
2
that, I'd
reflexiones.
like to
La primera,
attempt to
que
propose
Steve
2
nos lo
reflections. First,
menciona y en la
that
cual
Steve
dedica
mentioned, and in which
muchas páginas en el libro,
lots of
es
pages
que
are
las
dedicated even in his
democracias
book, is that
se deterioran de a
democracies
poco, que
deteriorate
tienen
little by
distintas
little
formas de morir.
with different ways of
Van
dying,
muriendo a veces
and
pasito a
they
pasito,
start
como
dying
dice
step
un
by step,
cantautor
just
que
like a
conocemos, ¿no?
singer
Pero bueno, lo
that
que
we
yo
have
creo que es
heard a lot
importante es
says.
preguntarse
So I think
si
it's
un proceso
important to
constituyente
ask
es
yourselves if a
o no
constitutional
una
process
de esas
is or it is
formas
not
de morir de la
one
democracia.
of these
Y
ways of a
sabemos que
democracy
algunos
to
procesos
die.
constituyentes
And we know that
latinoamericanos
some
han sido
constitutional
catalizadores de la destrucción de la
processes in
democracia.
Latin America
Pero preguntémonos,
catalyze the
profundicemos
destruction of
un poco en
democracy.
esto.
But
Un
let's get
proceso
deeper into
constituyente, a mi
it. A
juicio, no es per
constitutional
se
process,
un
to my
catalizador de
knowledge,
la
is not
muerte de
per
las
se
democracias. No
a
es una
catalyst of
forma de matar a las
democracies to die,
democracias.
and is not
Solo
one
lo
way to
es
kill democracies.
cuando el proceso
It is
constituyente es
only when the
capturado por
constitutional
un caudillo
process is
radical.
captured
Lo dice
by
Steve,
a radical
lo llama
leader,
los demagogos
as Steve
extremistas.
called them, the
Y
extremist
sabemos entonces que
demagogical
los
guys.
procesos
And
bolivarianos fueron
we know that
capturados más tarde
Bolivar processes were
por
captured
caudillos radicales
by these
que
radical
utilizando
leaders
el cambio
that
constitucional
utilizing
llevaron a la destrucción de
the
la democracia.
constitutional change
Creo que es
created
eso
the
lo que
destruction of
tenemos que
democracy.
evitar.
So
Creo que
I
es
think
muy
that is what
importante
we
lo que
need
vaya a
to
ocurrir
avoid.
en la
It is
convención,
very
pero también es
important what
muy
happens in the
importante lo que va a
convention,
ocurrir
but it's also
después de la
important what will
convención
happen
y
after
evitar
that convention.
entonces
And
a esos caudillos
avoiding,
extremistas.
hopefully, these
¿Cómo
extremist
identificar
leaders.
a esos caudillos
How can
extremistas?
we
Bueno,
identify
Steve
these
nos propone
extremist
4
leaders?
comportamientos
Steve
claves
proposes
de
4
un líder
key
autoritario que podemos
behavior of the
identificar con
authoritarian leader that
anticipación.
we could
Yo creo que en muchos de esos
anticipatedly
casos aquí en Chile estamos
identify.
lejos
Many
de
of these
eso.
cases
Afortunadamente
in
estamos
Chile,
lejos de eso.
I think we
Pero
are
hay
really
uno que me
far
preocupa
away from that,
especialmente
but
y en el
there's
cual me
one
quiero
I am
detener porque se
really
suele discutir
worried
sobre
about,
él,
and I would
que
like
es
to
la
stop on this as
tolerancia
it is
o el
always
fomento de la
discussed
violencia.
about, which is
Una de las preguntas
tolerance
que nos
or
propone Steve para
fostering or
identificar a
encouraging
uno de esos
violence.
líderes
One of the
autoritarios
propositions that Steve
es
mentions to
preguntarse si
identify
han
these
apoyado de manera
authoritarian leaders
tácita
is
la
if
violencia de sus
they
partidarios negándose
supported
a condenarla
explicitly
o
the
penalizarla sin
participation
ambigüedades.
of
Y en Chile
violence
la
without
relación con la
penalizing,
violencia, creo yo, ha
without
sido
ambiguity. And
levemente
I think that the
ambigua.
relationship with
Hay líderes
violence has
políticos
been
que se niegan a
slightly
condenarla.
ambiguous,
El
and some
caso más brutal
politicians
a mi
are
juicio es el
in
presidente del Partido
denial to
Comunista que
condemn them,
dijo, y lo cito, si
like
digo
the
que no debe
president
haber
of the Communist
violencia,
Party
quiere
says,
decir
if
que
I
digo
say
que no
that
salgan a
violence should not
manifestarse, y
exist,
eso no
I
lo
mean
diré. Pero la
that
verdad
they
es que casi
are
todos
not
los
going
demás
out to
condenan la
manifest
violencia.
themselves, and
Pero
I
a mi
won't say
juicio
that, but
hay
all
un
the others
cierto coqueteo
condemn
cierta
violence,
izquierda
but I think some
permanentemente con la
leftist
violencia. Yo
side
creo que tenemos que poner atención a
is
ella. Déjeme
permanently
citar un par
flirting
de
with
frases
violence.
que rescaté
And
de algunos
I have
debates en la
some
Cámara de Diputados. Por
phrases
ejemplo,
of
una
the
diputada dice,
lower chamber
¿alguien
debates.
piensa que porque yo condene la
Is
violencia
anyone
o
thinking
porque
that
otros
if
lo
I
hagan,
condemn
esta va a
violence
terminar?
or
La
others
violencia
do,
es
this
sistémica,
will finish?
es el reflejo de
It
algo.
is systemic and
Otro
it's
dice,
the
cuando
reflection of
algunos se
something.
quedan solamente en la destrucción que se
Others say
produjo
when
después
it
del
is
18 de
only the
octubre,
destruction after
es
the
difícil
October the
pensar
18th
en condenar
situation,
la violencia
it
tan
is hard to think
categóricamente.
of
Yo
violence
creo que estos son signos aún
condemnation
leves
in that
que debemos
categorically
aislar
way
para
or mood.
evitar la
I think we
captura
should
del proceso
isolate these
constitucional
to
más
avoid the
adelante por
capture
un
of the
demagogo
constitutional
extremista o
process
por un
later
caudillo
on by an
radical.
extreme
¿Qué es lo que debemos
demagogue or
aspirar?
a radical
Que el proceso
leader.
constituyente sea un
That's the aspiration,
canalizador,
that the
que pueda
constitutional
guiar las
process
aguas,
is
incluso
the
esas aguas
catalyst
torrentosas, hacia
to
un destino
even
compartido y mucho más
put that
calmo.
flow
A mi
rate
juicio,
of
algo de eso
torrential
son las experiencias
waters
colombiana
in a
y la
good
brasileña.
way.
¿Qué
The
hacer
experience
para
of
que el
Colombia
proceso
and Brazil,
constituyente sea
for
un
instance, what to do for
canalizador?
this
Bueno, el libro
constitutional
Steve propone distintos caminos, pero uno de
process
ellos, que es el
is
que hemos
a
discutido
channeling
aquí, es que la
possibility.
élite política y sobre todo los
Politically
partidos
lit
políticos se esfuercen
and
por
political
impedir
parties
que los demagogos extremistas
trying
lleguen
to
al
avoid
poder.
that the
Y para
extremist
eso
demagogues
entonces que
arrive to
eludan toda
power.
alianza con esos
So they
partidos y
avoid
candidatos
any
extremistas
alliance
que
with these
aíslen
extremist
sistemáticamente,
parties
nos dice el libro, a los
that
extremistas
isolates
en lugar de legitimarlos,
extremely
que formen un
these
frente común
leaders
para
instead
derrotarlos.
of make
Y
them
es aquí
legitimate, so
entonces
they
donde nos
create a
enfrentamos
common
a
strength to
esa tensión entre
defeat them.
la
So that
polarización que promueven
creates
muchos de
tension,
estos líderes
that polarization that many of
extremistas
these
y los
extremist
consensos, un
leaders
frente común
promote, and then
destinado a
consensus
derrotarlos.
as a
Yo creo
common
que
front
obviamente no
to
todo puede ser la
defeat them.
voluntad del
I don't
pueblo,
think
pero
that
y tampoco
willingness of
todo
the
puede ser
people
bloqueo.
is
Y en
the
esa
whole thing, but
tensión
not
es donde se construye
blocking them
quizás
as
el
well. In
futuro
that
de nuestra
tension or
democracia.
stress
Nos
is
dice
where we
Steve y
build
nos explicó
the
aquí
future
que la
of our
tensión en
democracies.
Estados
Steve
Unidos
said,
se rompió
explain
con
that
la gran
tension in the
abdicación
United States
republicana, como le llama. Es decir,
was
en Estados Unidos fue
broken
la derecha
with
la
the
que abdicó y
Republicans'
entregó
great
y se
abdication,
entregó
and
al
it was the
demagogo
right
populista.
side that
La pregunta es, ¿qué
was
ocurrirá
in the
en
hands
Chile?
of the populist
¿Será la élite de
demagogical
la izquierda
thoughts. What will
socialdemócrata la
happen
que
in
no
Chile?
logró contener a los
The social
extremistas y
democracy
pacte con ellos?
leftist
¿Será
right,
la derecha
left
quien será
side in Chile,
mañana
or would be the
calificado como
rightist to
el gran
be
abdicador?
qualified as
Yo
the
espero
one
que
on
ninguno lo sea.
abdication?
Yo
I
espero
hope
que el
no
proceso
one will do.
constituyente logre canalizar
And I
las
hope
aguas
that
y
the
volver a
constitutional
reforzar
process
la
put
democracia.
the
Que el
water
proceso
in the
constituyente se
channel
imponga, como
to
dice Ackerman
revitalize
en
democracy.
su
And as
reciente libro,
Ackerman
se
said in the
impongan
recent
los
book,
pragmáticos
that the
insiders que
pragmatic
logren contener
insiders
los
are
espíritus revolucionarios y
bigger,
volver
and they could
entonces a
contain the
revitalizar
revolutionary
no solo la
spirit to
constitución, sino también la
revitalize
política
not just
que va a
constitution,
permitir
but the politics
consolidar la
behind
nueva
to
constitución.
allow the consolidation of the new
Una segunda idea
constitution.
que yo creo
A
es
second thought,
tremendamente
I
interesante y
think it
desafiante
is
es esto que nos plantea
tremendously
Steve de la
challenging, is
contención
what Steve said
de
about
las
containment
instituciones,
of
de la importancia
institutions
de las reglas no escritas.
and how important
Esto lo saben
the
de sobra
non-written
los
rules
cientistas
are.
políticos, pero muchas veces
The
nosotros
political
los
scientists
abogados lo
know,
olvidamos.
but
Ponemos
the lawyers, we
demasiada
forget that.
confianza en la
And
capacidad
we
de
trust
escribir
so
reglas
much
hermosas,
in
de
trust
diseñar
of
instituciones
beautiful
perfectas,
rules
y
written and
desatendemos
designing
esto
perfect
que en
institutions.
Estados Unidos
And
se
we
ha
forget
escrito
something
la
that in the United
constitución no
States was
escrita,
written,
aquí el writ amar, es decir, esta
unwritten
constitución que
constitution.
apoya y
That
suplementa a
constitution
la
that
constitución
supports and
escrita
is
sin
a
reemplazarla.
supplement of the written
Nosotros también
constitution
tenemos
without
una
replacing
constitución no
it.
escrita, pero
We
la verdad es
have
que nunca
an
la hemos
unwritten constitution, but
codificado
we have
o
never
la tenemos
encoded
muy
that. Or
escondida.
maybe it is
Steve
so
nos llama a
hidden
no olvidar
that
esas
Steve says, please
innumerables
do not
reglas no
forget
escritas que
all
dan
these
vida a la
non-written
democracia.
rules that
Nos dice,
will
por
put
ejemplo, las
democracy
democracias
alive,
funcionan mejor y
saying
sobreviven
democracies
durante más
could work
tiempo
better
cuando
and
las
survive
constituciones se
for longer
apuntalan
when
con normas
constitutions are
democráticas
leveraged
no escritas.
by
O también agrega,
democratic
ni siquiera las
standards or
constituciones
rules
bien
that are
diseñadas,
non-written.
esas que
Not even
esperamos
very
diseñar
well
nosotros
designed constitutions
prontamente,
as the one we
pueden
want to
continuar por sí
design
solas
could
garantizar la democracia.
continue on
Para
their own
empezar,
and
toda
guarantee
constitución
democracy. To
es
start with,
incompleta y
every
por eso tenemos
constitution
que confiar
is in
también
itself
en el
incomplete, and that's why we need
delgado
to
velo de la convención.
trust in
En
that
Chile, la
very
transición se
subtle
hizo sobre
veil
la
of
base de una
convention.
constitución no
The
escrita.
transition
Se
was
hizo sobre la
based on
base de un
an
acuerdo no
unwritten
escrito.
constitution
La
and
paradoja entonces es
an
que la
agreement
constitución
that it
escrita es
was
muy
not written.
importante,
So the paradox
pero también
on
no
this
es tan
written
importante si es
constitution,
que
it is very
olvidamos una
important, but it's not that
no
much of an
escrita.
important
Tan
one
importante
if we
como las
forget
normas
the unwritten
constitucionales son entonces las
constitution.
normas
So
que
the
generan esa
constitutional
contención
rules are
institucional.
important, but
esa
the ones
contención material
generating
versus
the
la contención formal.
constitutional
Hay
containment, the
algunos
material
ejemplos que nos
containment
permiten ver
versus
que en
the
nuestro país
formal
la
containment. Some
contención
examples will
institucional,
show
la
that
cultura institucional, la
that
constitución no
containment,
escrita,
the
llamámosle como
constitutional
sea,
culture or the enriched
está
constitution, call it what
dañada.
you want,
Fijémonos, por ejemplo,
is
en
damaged.
la relación Tribunal
Let's think
Constitucional y Banco
about the
Central. El Tribunal
Constitutional Court
Constitucional
and the
tiene
Central
largas
Bank. The
páginas en la
Constitutional
Constitución.
Court
El Banco
with
Central tiene un
long
par de
pages in
incisos, un par
Constitution
de
and the Central Bank
artículos.
just
Y
a couple of
sabemos que el
inserts and
prestigio del Banco
articles. And we
Central
know that
está
the prestige of
entonces
the Central
fundado
Bank is
principalmente en la cultura
funded
institucional que ha logrado
basically in the
conformar
institutional culture
en
that
estos
they were
últimos
able to
30 años.
create in these
Y el
last
Tribunal
30
Constitucional, en
years, and the
cambio, ha
Constitutional
tendido a
Court
debilitarse
in exchange
principalmente por
tend
su cultura
to
institucional.
weaken
O veámoslo desde
basically
otra
because of
forma,
their
el Congreso Nacional.
institutional
Hoy
culture. Let's
día,
say
a mi juicio, nos
National
enfrentamos a un
Congress. Today
Congreso
we
sin
face a
contención.
Congress that
Steve
is
anota algunos
uncontained,
conceptos para definir
no
esta falta de
constraint.
concepción. Ya lo
Steve
dijo,
talks
citando
about some
Tushnet,
concepts.
la
Citando Tushnet said,
táctica de,
the tactics
de la
of
dureza constitucional, el ciclo de
constitutional
extremismo
hardness or
constitucional que
forbearance
siente,
and the
citando a Eric
constitutional
Nelson. Todo
growing
esto en alguna medida
situation,
aplica al
citing
Congreso
Eric
chileno,
Nelson,
el
applies
llamado
to the
parlamentarismo de
National
facto,
Congress,
el
the
aceptar
de
los sacrilegios
facto
de la
parliamentary
Constitución,
position,
las múltiples
and
acusaciones
what happens with
constitucionales,
multiple
incluso contra el
constitutional
presidente
accusations,
de la
even
República,
against
cuestión que no había ocurrido
the
ni
president
siquiera
of the
bajo el gobierno
republic,
de la Unidad
something that
Popular, en
didn't even
fin, y
happen
otra
under the
serie de
popular
prácticas que
unit,
han
Unidad
dado forma a
Popular
esta
government,
cultura del
and
resquicio,
others
a mí me
that
hacen
were
ver
on the
que
culture
tenemos que poner
of
también
looking
atención
for
en este proceso no solo a la Constitución escrita,
another way.
sino que
It's
también
not just
a
the
las
written
convenciones, a
constitution,
esta
but also
Constitución no escrita.
convention
Quiero terminar
and
diciendo
unwritten
que nuestro proceso
constitution.
constituyente
I
entonces debe
want
ser un
to
proceso de
mention that the
reconstitución
constitutional
de nuestra
process should
Constitución
be
escrita, pero
reconstituting
también
our
debe ser
written
un proceso de
constitution, but
reconstitución de
also
nuestras reglas no
reconstituting
escritas. ¿Y por
the
qué? Porque son en esa
unwritten rules.
convivencia entre
Is
Constitución
in this
escrita y
coexistence
pactos no
between the
escritos
two,
en
between
los cuales
unwritten
vamos a poder
constitution and
consolidar hacia el
unwritten
futuro
pact,
nuestra
the one that will
democracia y
consolidate in
vamos
the
a poder
future our
consolidar también
democracies and
un nuevo
consolidating
proyecto para
the
salir
new
adelante
project
como
to
país.
come out
Muchas gracias.
forward as a country. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sebastian. We have 10 minutes to give an answer to an enormous amount of questions. So my proposition is we have questions for Claudia and Sebastian that I will send, and I have some comparison questions for Steve about the situation of the United States and Peru, for instance, that we might leave aside for a next forum. But the questions that we have received about Chile, with lots of reflections for Sebastian and Claudia, and I think we could have some sort of brief discussion to close this forum. They have a lot to do with the effect of polarization, this that you mentioned, Sebastian, in your presentation also, people who are concerned about questions that have to do with street violence, others that from the view from the opposite view think about structural violence that had to do with the background behind that violence in the streets. So I would better propose for 3 minutes each, so we could be on time. Then we kind of review it again. Steve, you will be first on how much polarization we see in Chile in comparative terms, and in terms of the experience, the historical experience and cross-national experience that you have mentioned in the book, and of course some brief answer on the side of Claudia and Sebastian about this. I know we have so many questions. We will keep them. I promise to talk in other fora, but we have no more time now. Before we could finish, we will have again the questionnaire in the chat, so you could mention your preferences on subject matter. And whenever possible, we will do a translation into English for any of you asking for this questionnaire in English. Steve, thank you. And thank you, Sebastian and Claudia, for these great comments. I'm not an expert, a good expert enough about Chilean politics to talk about that polarization. And violence, the United States had 3 political deaths in the last month of the massive mobilization after George Floyd's assassination, not because of the state, but because of political activism. So what I think is, when do we know if we cross that line? And when is polarization becoming dangerous? One manifestation, one sign is violence. When polarization starts to be violent, when you have physical attack, it becomes a signal to be concerned. I am really worried about the United States as we arrived to violence much more than in Chile. And we are people that is really using weapons. So the potential for violence is too high. So how can we give an answer to that sort of violence? That's the critical thing. In my opinion, and political science says that repression is not solution. It's not something that will only dominate in 2 or 3 steps, some more authoritarian situation, but in many of the cases, it will speed up the conflict process. There are very few cases in which strategy of repression or suppression in the democratic context will end up in an easy democracy. But how can we give an answer to that? In the polarization context, United States and Chile are a little different, I'd say, because violence and polarization in the United States is from the parties, is Democrats and Republicans. And in Chile, as Claudia explains so well, it is not just like that. So the relationship between the street and the parties is not that clear. And the main distance is that gap between the parties, the leaders, the political elite, and the streets. So there's a lot, in my opinion, that political leaders can do and must do in the United States to whistleblow violence all over. Today, we have dead threats against the local bureaucrats that deny, Republican, that deny to rob that election of Trump, and they are threatening to kill them. And there's no Republican politician that is willing to say this is wrong.
This is more complicated in Chile because we're not clear who it does, who represents those that are acting violently. I don't think this is quite a satisfactory answer. However, we need to channel protests and creating opportunities, and the sensation that there is an answer. There are participation channels, there are ways to participate, but there are no guarantees that such a change of reform or change or constitutional change will give solutions to those that are asking for radical changes. But it will at least offer a possible path. And politics, this is not easy. Democracy in times of crisis is very, very complicated. I don't want to say that solution will be easy. Thank you, Steve. We have a minute and a half for Claudia and for Sebastián. Yes, I would say that violence that we have lived is failure of politics, and this is the blocking from the political side, blocking, and that it has led to this mobilization. and also the situation, the contingent situation. And it was a system that was immune to the citizens' will and the citizens' need. And that's why it led to such situations and the riots in 2019. And people said, oh, Chile was an oasis of peace. And we were 10 years mobilizing, intensive mobilization with riots and violence, as it has seen in the conflict observatory, shows this lack of association between this and the reality of the citizens. So I think that in this sense, we have been here due to this lack of capacity of the political system of becoming part of that violence, structural violence that many people have lived, and political, social, and economic. Thank you.
Gracias.
Sebastián.
Bueno, yo creo que efectivamente lo que uno debe intentar en la medida de las propias capacidades es que en las áreas en las cuales uno se desempeña se destierre fuertemente el lenguaje de la violencia y también se le condene como mecanismo con cierta legitimidad para el cambio. El cambio social producido por violencia, creo yo, es un cambio no solo originado oscuramente, sino que además no es consolidable, es un cambio que nace con un daño profundo que hace que finalmente el péndulo en algún momento vuelva a otras situaciones de violencia. Por eso yo creo entonces que en un ámbito académico como el nuestro, y principalmente en la política, el llamado a desterrar el lenguaje de violencia y los coqueteos con la violencia, porque nadie dice que haya una justificación explícita, pero sí hay una justificación implícita de la violencia como método de acción política, es una cuestión que debemos atender especialmente para proteger la democracia.
Thank you, Sebastián. We have 1 minute to close. We were going to give space for Claudio Fuentes. Claudio Fuentes, he could do so. We will do it in the next forum. And I would like to thank you on behalf of the initiative and Dr. Klaas, the initiative at a local level. It leaves us a lot to think in today's conversation, and it puts this on the table in such a situation that we need to discuss, and that is, what is the polarization that we have in Chile? What is the type of cleavage that we have that is tensioning the political system and society? And what is polarization of different actors, different sectors of society? Imagine we have. So we are in a situation where different actors are projecting in others factors of polarization, factors that complicate preferences, that complicate dialogue. And hopefully such an initiative will start to promote and foster society. And we will be discussing this again. And I would like to thank you all for your attendance, and the panel members for taking time and also stimulate us to think, to evaluate these situations and leave us with the will to know more. Thank you very much.